Hundreds of farmers in Arkansas gathered at a town hall last week to ask Congress for help. Mounting debt, aging equipment, and disappearing profits are making it nearly impossible for them to break even, let alone to turn a profit. One of those farmers calls the president's tariffs, quote, the ice cream on top of a cake of a perfect storm.
In today's trade climate, farmers on both sides of the border are facing storms they did not create. In Arkansas, soybean growers have watched their largest buyer disappear almost overnight. For decades, China purchased billions of dollars of U.S. soybeans, but after tariffs, those exports fell from more than $12 billion to zero. Farmers now look at fields that once sustained their families and see losses piling up. At the same time, Canadian farmers in Saskatchewan are confronting their own shock. China has imposed a 76% tariff on canola, a crop that was Canada's top agricultural export to that market just a year ago.
Minister announcing a $370 million production incentive to help Canada's canola producers, primarily in Saskatchewan. This new incentive was launched to address the huge challenges that are being imposed on canola producers.
The hardship is real in both countries, but the responses of their governments could not be more different. The United States produces about 40% more food than it consumes, so foreign markets are essential. Losing China, which accounts for over 60% of global soybean demand, has been devastating. With Brazil taking the lead, U.S. beans have slipped in value. Early September prices were near $10 a bushel, but after transport and basis costs, many farmers cleared barely $9. Purdue University puts the cost of production at $12.30, leaving losses across much of the Midwest. On average, cotton growers are down $375 an acre, corn farmers $220, and soybean producers $120. Smaller operators with paid-off equipment may survive, but large farms carrying heavy debt are now facing the steepest risks. North of the border, the pain is also acute. When Canada imposed a 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles, Beijing retaliated with duties approaching 76% on canola. For Saskatchewan, where canola is the backbone of rural economies, this was a heavy blow. Yet Ottawa's answer has been immediate. Prime Minister Mark Carney announced a $370 million production incentive aimed at absorbing canola into the domestic biofuel supply chain. Alongside that, the government introduced a $5 billion support fund to help companies retool, enter new markets, and retrain workers displaced by the trade war. Saskatchewan's Premier Scott Moe is already on the road, meeting officials in China and elsewhere to advocate for lifting tariffs and diversifying export destinations. These steps do not erase the pain of losing a major buyer, but they provide farmers and businesses with a buffer, signaling that government policy is working to soften the blow and chart a path forward. The contrast is striking. In the United States, the farm sector that once exported to every corner of the world now faces declining prices, mounting debt, and the loss of a market worth over $12 billion annually. Washington has relied on subsidies in past tariff disputes, but without real access to buyers, even large aid packages cannot secure long-term survival. In Canada, the hit from China is undeniable, yet the government is taking a different path. By redirecting crops into biofuel production, supporting industry with billions in adaptation funds, and engaging directly with trading partners, Ottawa is trying to keep its producers afloat and its markets open. Both nations are caught in the same global storm of tariffs, but the outcomes diverge sharply. One is mired in uncertainty, watching farmers sink under the weight of lost demand. The other is at least building lifelines, using the crisis to invest in resilience. Trump's tariff push has backfired on the very farmers who helped put him in office, while Carney's swift response shows how policy choices can mean the difference between despair and adaptation.
All right, so in Quebec, there is a bunch of American alcohol that's going bad.
The Quebec Liquor Board is getting ready to destroy $300,000 worth of American wine, I believe it is.
At the start of 2025, Donald Trump expanded his use of tariffs, presenting them as a sharp tool to win concessions abroad. Among the sectors caught in this new wave of trade retaliation was American alcohol. In February, after Washington imposed emergency tariffs on Canadian goods, Ottawa and the provinces fired back. Quebec, in particular, ordered its state-run liquor board to pull every American product from store shelves. From bourbon to California wine, the message was clear. If Trump wanted to weaponize trade, Canada would not be a silent target. What followed was a standoff that showed how a provincial decision could ripple through cross-border commerce, turning a presidential decree into a costly headache for American producers.
The numbers illustrate the impact. Roughly $27 million worth of American alcohol has been sitting idle in Quebec's warehouses since early March. According to CTV News, about $300,000 worth of that stock reached its expiry window this summer. Initially, officials prepared to destroy the goods, a move that sparked public frustration about waste and fiscal responsibility. Facing criticism, the province changed course and announced the products would be donated to hospitality schools and community organizations. Items such as boxed wine, rosé, and ready-to-drink cocktails were redirected to educational use rather than poured down the drain. In practice, Quebec absorbed the short-term costs of storage and lost sales, yet the choice also demonstrated resilience. Instead of allowing Trump's tariffs to dictate the terms, the province turned unsellable stock into an opportunity to strengthen local institutions and protect domestic producers.
Now into the troubles facing the American wine industry in the face of President Trump's tariffs. And some wineries are telling NBC News they may not come back from this trade war.
The American alcohol sector has not escaped unscathed. The Distilled Spirits Council of the United States reported in August that U.S. exports to Canada plunged by more than 60% in the first half of 2025. Shipments fell from 114 million to just 43.4 million, with spirits down 62% and wine down 67%. That drop translates into losses of hundreds of millions for American producers, many of whom counted Canada as their second largest export market. Smaller distillers have been particularly vulnerable. Without access to provincial liquor boards, their distribution channels have collapsed almost overnight, leaving warehouses full of unsold inventory. Trade groups warn that job losses in bottling, distribution, and hospitality could accelerate if the standoff drags on into next year. Meanwhile, Canadian labels filled the gap. The Quebec government confirmed that local wine and spirit sales jumped between 30% and 60% since March, a surge that has created new opportunities for regional vineyards and craft distilleries. Retailers report that consumers have adapted quickly, often choosing Canadian substitutes without hesitation. What looked at first like a defensive measure has in fact reinforced Canada's domestic industry. Rather than fold under pressure, Canada redirected consumer demand, shielding its market while American exporters carried the heaviest burden of the tariff war. The broader lesson is that tariffs are not a one-sided weapon. Trump sought to squeeze Canada by raising duties, but the countermeasures show a different story. Ottawa and the provinces demonstrated that they could bear the immediate strain in order to protect long-term independence. Quebec's decision to pull American alcohol, despite the costs, underlined that Canada would not allow foreign tariffs to define its domestic shelves. From Ottawa's trade reset to Quebec's stand, the message to Washington is consistent. Canada is prepared to absorb losses today if it means defending its sovereignty tomorrow. American distillers now face shrinking exports, while Canadian producers and retailers adapt and expand. In this contest, the balance of pressure does not rest solely in the White House. It is shared, and Canada has proven it can carry its share with determination. Trump may have fired the opening shot with tariffs, but Canada's response has turned the dispute into a test of endurance, one that shows the country is neither passive nor powerless.
President Trump hit Brazil with a 50% tariff, the steepest against any nation. Trump's politically charged tariff on the U.S.'s largest supplier of coffee.
This is something to definitely pay attention to because it will mean higher coffee prices.
Morning routines in America often begin with something simple, a hot cup of coffee. For many families, that first sip is more than caffeine. It is a ritual that sets the tone for the day. But even that small comfort is no longer immune from politics. After President Trump imposed a 50% tariff on Brazil, the world's largest coffee exporter, prices began to climb sharply. A pound of ground coffee that cost $6 last year now sells for about $8. For importers, invoices that once totaled $10,000 now arrive at $15,000. Small cafes say the extra cost could decide whether they survive. This is not an abstract policy debate in Washington. It is a daily expense that lands on the checkout receipt of millions of households. What was meant to punish a foreign country is making mornings more expensive in the United States. Coffee is only one product. When tariffs spread across metals, food, and manufactured goods, the impact becomes unavoidable.
Watch, the U.S. economy has a case of foodflation.
Coffee up nearly 15%, ground beef up just over 11%. Egg prices hit by avian flu are falling, but still up more than 16%.
There's no doubt Americans are paying the tariffs at this point.
The Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that wholesale prices for fresh vegetables surged at a record pace in July. Overall grocery costs are up 2.2% compared with last year. Coffee is nearly 15% higher, ground beef more than 11%, and eggs remain 16% above last year's level. Aluminum and steel tariffs, introduced in March, now show up in canned goods, beverages, and food processing costs. Wholesale inflation climbed 0.9% from June to July, the sharpest monthly increase since June 2022. Economists had expected only a modest rise, but tariffs have sped up the pressure. At first, large retailers absorbed part of the burden, but that cushion is gone. With supply tightening and costs rising, families face fewer choices and thinner budgets. If grocery bills show the hidden tax of tariffs, tourism shows how those policies ripple through entire communities. Canada remains one of America's closest economic partners, yet relations changed on August 1 when Trump raised tariffs on Canadian goods outside USMCA to 35%. In response, Canada has turned to diversify exports toward Europe and strengthen cooperation with Mexico.
What happens in Vegas could spell trouble for the U.S. economy. Empty streets and casinos.
It's slow. When I drive down the strip going to work in the morning and I barely see visitors out there.
The tariffs were meant to squeeze Ottawa, but they are already hitting American communities. Tourism shows the clearest effect. According to the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority, total visitors in June fell more than 11% compared with a year ago.
President Trump's tariff announcements angering potential visitors like Canadians.
Used to we have like lot for Canadian, and now no.
Flights from Canada dropped over 18%. Hotels, casinos, and convention halls counted tens of thousands fewer guests. In a city where a quarter of workers depend on tourism, the absence of Canadian visitors translates into real losses for restaurants, entertainment, and local businesses. What was designed to extract concessions abroad is instead draining revenue from America's own economy.
A vote for Trump means your groceries will be cheaper.
Trump promised tariffs would put America first. In reality, they are circling back onto American households and businesses. Coffee is pricier, grocery bills are heavier, and tourism is weaker. The weight falls inside the United States, where families and local economies bear the cost. Canada, meanwhile, is not yielding. It is adapting, finding new markets, and holding leverage. This contrast shows tariffs are not forcing neighbors into quick concessions. Instead, they are exposing America's own vulnerabilities. The story of tariffs is not written in speeches, but in daily life. It is printed on grocery receipts, in tighter budgets, and in the empty hotel rooms of Las Vegas. What was billed as a show of strength abroad has become a bill handed to the American people.